Warning, this video contains spoilers for Halloween Ends, because it's almost impossible to discuss how bad this movie is without divulging its main creative conceit. So if you have not seen Halloween Ends and wish to remain unspoiled, then you should probably skip this video for now. You can always come back to it later, I promise. Biological Riley presents Halloween Ends, a movie review. Halloween Ends is the conclusion of a series that was built upon a rocky foundation. This recently released David Gordon Green directed edition of the beloved slasher franchise acted as the capstone of a trilogy of films that were direct sequels to the classic 1978 John Carpenter original. A trilogy of films that were all helmed by David Gordon Green, but had mixed results. See Halloween 2018, the first film in this trilogy, was a solid slasher flick, even despite how it appeared to have some editing changes in post-production, something that caused issues. Issues like how the final girl, Laurie Strode, should have been the one to free slasher Michael Myers from his prison instead of his doctor. Because let's be clear, Halloween 2018 was really setting up a strong theme of generational trauma where Laurie's toxic PTSD gun-toting doomsday bunkering self would have freed Michael and thus further traumatized her family rather than ultimately condoning her antisocial and unhealthy behaviors, which would have been a much bolder, yet correct, creative decision compared to what we ultimately received. But I digress. That's a whole nother video entirely. Just know that Halloween 2018 was flawed, but overall fine enough on its own. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for 2021's Halloween Kills, which was a major step back from Halloween 2018. As the second film in this trilogy, Halloween Kills was a god-awful experience that felt as if it were treading water. In fact, the movie story was at a standstill to the point that the film might as well have been in a holding pattern. The plot was paper thin, and the overarching story barely progressed at all. It was honestly a meager experience that didn't justify its own existence. If anything, Halloween Kills was no killer, all filler, because ultimately what Halloween Kills killed was my fucking patience. Hell, even the movie's main mantra of quote-unquote evil dies tonight was misleading, because despite how many characters would repeat those words ad nauseum in that film, evil did not in fact die tonight, or in Halloween Kills rather, because for that the characters and the audience would have to wait until Halloween Ends, a sequel releasing a year later and set 4 or 5 years after Halloween Kills, because truly evil indeed did not die that night. But with Halloween Ends, the wait for evil to perish is over. The moment has finally arrived. Evil can at last be thwarted, but unfortunately Halloween Ends isn't very good. To be honest, it's actually pretty bad. While sure, Halloween Ends is a cut above Halloween Kills, it takes creative risks and has more interesting potential themes, but the film is ultimately a poorly executed misfire and is so for a multitude of reasons. For one thing, it's a poor capstone to a Halloween trilogy. In fact, the films leading up to this movie, as well as even Halloween Ends trailer, all hyped up the final showdown between Jamie Lee Curtis's beloved final girl Laurie Strode against her tormentor in the masked slasher Michael Myers, no relation. But the film isn't really about this confrontation. Yeah, sure, it does have the expected final battle, but the lead up to that said final battle had little to do with Strode and Myers' ultimate confrontation. If anything, the penultimate battle feels like an afterthought. It's a fart in the wind, mostly because Halloween Ends isn't about the classic conflict of killer versus final girl. The movie is instead about societal trauma. See, most of Halloween Ends is a more self-reflective affair. As stated before, it takes place a few years after the end of Halloween Kills, and ever since that violent Halloween night, Michael Myers has gone missing, and the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois has been besieged by numerous violent tragedies unrelated to Mr. Myers, all to the point that the town has a shared societal trauma, as well as a community that condemns people with past misdeeds, even though they deserve more compassion. And on the one hand, these are very interesting themes. After all, we in America both live in a never-ending era of mass shootings, as well as a society that neglects, fears, and even downright discriminates against the mentally ill and those with criminal records. And to wit, Halloween Ends could have been an interesting story. It could have been relatable. Hell, it could have been a thematically comparable piece to the Fear Street movies, which also tackled themes of societal and community trauma and violence. But there is a problem here. See, on the other hand, Fear Street actually handled these themes with care and aimed its criticisms of a violent society at its root cause and the instigating party that benefits from the status quo. Yes, the movie trilogy that awesomely referred to sex as quote-unquote Pound Town was actually a really smart trilogy of movies, yet Halloween Ends drops the ball here. Movie teases similar themes but executes on them very poorly, as seen with the character of Corey, who is one of the film's main protagonists. Through Corey, a character who accidentally killed a kid while he was the subject of a cruel and frightening prank in the movie's introduction, Halloween Ends Ends sets up the idea that societal trauma and public ostracization can harm those who don't deserve it. People like Corey, who accidentally killed a kid in a freak accident, yet faces the wrath of societal judgment. And at first, it appears as if the movie is laying the groundwork for some form of redemption for the character, that despite how he has been kicked to the proverbial curb, he can ultimately prove himself virtuous. But unfortunately, this doesn't happen. If anything, the opposite occurs. See, Corey eventually runs into Michael Myers, who surprisingly doesn't kill him, and then through the power of not explaining anything and choppy edits, Corey turns evil and goes on his own mass killing spree, proving that he was worthy of the shame and ridicule all along. Which is really unfortunate because Halloween Ends overall undermines Corey's potential, because truly the character really could have stood for something important and relevant here, but instead the film mishandles the character and the themes he represents. This character overall falls flat. Furthermore, Halloween Ends is a fucking mess. Thematically speaking, the film is an inconsistent amalgamation of storytelling sludge, all to the point that I wonder whether or not there was some studio interference bullfuckery at play here as well. After all, the way in which Corey just turns evil after gazing into Michael Myers' scary face isn't very well explained. Like, yeah, I get that Michael Myers is the personification of the boogeyman, though with less rhythm, but Myers generally isn't a psychopath who shies away from murdering any adult. If anything, sparing a potential victim isn't his MO, let alone allowing that said victim to become his mass murdering apprentice as if Michael Myers were a Sith Lord. From our understanding of the Michael Myers character, it stretches credulity here. He is a serial killer, a mass murderer. He doesn't have time to take trainees. Michael Myers is a solo package. Yet the movie attempts and fails when it comes to this development. I just don't buy into it, even though Halloween Ends spends a lot of time focusing on Corey's murdering exploits. The movie just face plants hard here, despite its effort to try and convince us of the narrative's validity. And honestly, Corey's character turn overall undermines what Michael Myers, as well as the Halloween franchise as a whole, represents. It doesn't work. Ultimately, Halloween Ends fails on two fronts. Firstly, the film thematically is unable to execute on its more interesting and risky themes about societal trauma, and secondly, the movie doesn't work as a penultimate chapter of Michael's and Laurie's decades-long conflict, resulting in a cinematic experience with two unfulfilled potential creative aims. And due to this, Halloween Ends is both a bad Halloween movie and also just a bad horror movie overall. It's a very unenjoyable cinematic experience, squandered interesting themes, be damned. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you thought of Halloween Ends. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you under this credit sequence, and $5 a month allows you to start making review requests. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, particularly my high tier ones in David, Samantha Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.